Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are once again looking at the suggestions which were passed to developers in September of 2020, and after having a look at the aviation part and the ground part, it's now time to turn our eyes to the naval part. So let's get started. The first one is from I Am Just a Noob, and it's talking about some other Clemsons, but not Clemsons that you'll be used to. Obviously the Clemsons in the game have a pretty bad record, I would say. They're classed as some of the worst destroyers in the game, but these two are slightly different. This is the Uss Hovi and the Uss Hatfield. The major differences between these and the other Clemsons that we have in game is these actually have quite good armaments. The Uss Hovi has 4 turrets with 2 guns per turret, so 8 overall, and they're all 4-inch guns. The Hatfield has 4 turrets with 1 gun per turret, so therefore it has 4 overall, and they are 5-inch guns. Now they do lack in the AA department. They have a single 3-inch AA gun. They also have 12 21-inch torpedo tubes, but these things are definitely there to be able to be used quite effectively, basically meaning that when it comes to these vehicles, what will happen is they will just have more firepower than the Clemsons that exist. So the USS Hovi, during the interwar period, was busy delivering papers. It sailed over to ports in Europe and Asia, and during World War II was converted to a minesweeper. During the invasion of Guadalcanal, she carried out screening for transport ships, and she would also assist with shelling shore to assist the landings. During her time, she primarily went about escorting ships, and during the invasion of Luzon, her convoy through Surigao was subject to heavy air attacks, to the point where she was not allowed to open fire against enemy aircraft unless the aircraft was directly towards her. She was able to rescue about 100 men from Long and Brooks, who were subject to a kamikaze attack. She was able to down 1 kamikaze on that day, and on the 7th of January 1945, a kamikaze put the flames to Chandler, crashed onto the starboard beam, and a torpedo also hit the rear engine room on the starboard side, losing all power. Following this, her hull would break in half as her bow raised above the water, slowly sinking. The crew saved from Long and Brooks would be saved, along with some of her own men, by the USS Chandler and West Virginia. So unfortunately, wasn't able to survive. And the USS Hatfield is slightly different. It mainly did training cruises and maneuvers during the interwar period, and then during World War II was used as patrol in Alaskan waters, escorted transport ships from time to time. In October 1944, it was converted to a target towing vessel, the towing targets for aircraft bombing, and also served as a training ship during her career. So overall, when it comes to these 2 ships, the main thing to focus on is these would-be Clemsons, which do have a little bit more oomph in them, which has been a bit of an issue for the Clemsons, so therefore why not give them a little bit of extra firepower. The next machine is from Way of the Woke, and this is a Soviet machine, or a Russian machine, I suppose. And this is the Centaurus, I think is how you say it. And what this is another ridiculously large machine, which was built at the turn of the century, or near the turn of the century, of the 20th century. And as you can see here, in the late 19th century, so that's the 1800s, the Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, had made efforts to pursue a new warm water Pacific port in the far east of his empire. Russia had entered into an agreement with China that leased Port Arthur for a period of 25 years in March 1898, which satisfied the Tsar's requirements. However, this came at a diplomatic cost, as just years days earlier, the Japanese had attempted to seize the port, only to be stopped by Western powers in exchange for money. And this would force the Russians to begin a naval construction program of new pre-dreadnoughts to protect Port Arthur from its eastern adversaries. And the only problem was that most Russian shipyards were already full producing warships for the Navy, which was, obviously designed by Tsar Nicholas, and this meant that this ship had to be outsourced when it came to some of its production plans. A design was brought up, or a design was created on June 14th, 1898, and a few days after, the French shipyard, the Forges et Chantiers de la Méditerranée, responded with a proposal based on an existing French battleship design. The Tsar's Naval Technical Committee approved the proposal with modifications, and the contract was signed on the 20th of July in 1898 at a cost of 11 million rubles. So one of the signature features of the design was the Cesarevich's tumble-home hull based on the French battleship, the Yoregiberi, which I'm sure I've said wrong. It allowed a greater freeboard and field of fire for the gun, along with reducing the roll effect of the rough seas. A con, however, was that the ship made tight turns. The ship made excessive heel, giving the effect it was going to capsize, noted by Japanese observers during the Russo-Japanese War, and the Cesarevich was considered to be an engineering naval for the Russian Navy at the time, incorporating new components such as a longitudinal anti-torpedo bulkhead, electric turret drives, bar and shroud coincidence rangefinders, and other fire control systems that would allow for a much smoother operating doctrine. It was laid down on the 8th of July 1899 and launched on the 23rd of February 1901. The commissioning followed on the 31st of August in 1903, and it arrived at Port Arthur in December as the country's best battleship to field against the Japanese. So what armament did this thing have? Well, it had 4 305mm guns, 2 dual sets, one on the front, one on the back. It had 12 152mm in 6 sets of dual mountings, 10 75s, 4 47s, 2 37s, 4 7.62s, and it also had some torpedo tubes, 4 in fact 381mm torpedo tubes. So this had a little bit of everything when it came to it, and it had a ton of armor as well. The belt is around about 250 to 160, the upper belt 200 to 120, the deck itself was 50, and the turrets were 150. This thing could go at about 18 knots, mainly because it was so heavy, and it also had 20 Belleville boilers, which gave it 16,300 horsepower from the machine. So definitely a tanky boy, and could definitely make its way into War Thunder. The next one is Dreadnoughts by Admiral Aruwan, and we're talking about specifically the HMS Dreadnought, the big boy. The Dreadnought obviously changed a lot of how people saw ships, especially in the early 1900s. So yeah, let's have a look at this machine. So the Dreadnought is a very important part of naval history, and the reason for this is basically because of the technological advancements which happened at the end of the 19th century. In the year of 1884, there was a paradigm shift invention in France. This was the culmination that many major nations had been independently seeking in recent years to an issue that had been present ever since since the first firearms had been invented. And this issue was black powder, the projectile propellant of choice for hundreds of years, and the fire in firearms. It did the job better than anything else, but the tendency to obscure entire battlefields on land or sea, and the ever-present issue of black powder fouling in everything from the smallest parlor pistol to the largest black powder cannon ever, the 450mm 100-ton gun. Combine this with the lightning fast pace of technological innovation in the 1800s, the adoption of paper cartridges and later brass cartridges in all firearms, allowing for the change from muzzle loading to the far faster breech loading for firearms of all sizes, and these issues were becoming more and more of an obstacle needing to be overcome rather than a single inconvenience at a time. So what changed? What changed across this point? So a powder formula called poudre blanche that had been perfected by French chemist Paul Viel. This white powder was the first ever form of smokeless gunpowder ever successfully developed. It allowed for far more potent propulsion for faster moving bullets and shells of all calibers, and solving the issue of smoke, haze, and fouling, ushering a new era of firearms development at all sizes that had really taken off by the 1890s. This resulted in many new doctrines and design families and doctrinal offshoots, and much more being developed to make use of the new era of warfare. And one of the most fluidly advancing fields as a result of smokeless powder was naval warfare because of this change. So gunnery developments in the late 1890s and early 1900s, led by the UK by Percy Scott and the United States by William Sims, had quickly resulted in expected battle ranges out to an then unprecedented 6,000 yards. A distance great enough to force gunners to wait for the shell to arrive before applying correction for the next salvo. And a related problem was that the shell splashes from the more numerous smaller weapons tended to obscure the splashes of the bigger guns. Either the smaller caliber would have to hold their fire to wait for the slow-firing heavies, losing the advantage of their faster fire rate, or it would be uncertain whether a splash was due to a heavy or a light gun, making ranging and aiming unreliable. Compounding this problem was the long-range torpedoes, which were expected to be in service soon, and these would discourage ships from closing to ranges where the smaller guns' faster fire rates would become more prominent. And this meant that keeping the range open generally negated the threat from torpedoes and further reinforced the need for heavy guns of a uniform caliber. So in 1903, the Italian naval architect Vittorio Cuniberti first developed the concept of an all-big battleship, or all-big gun battleship, showing that from conceptualization to commissioning, it was not long before the all-big gun concept would become a reality. When the Italian Navy did not pursue its ideas, Cuniberti wrote an article in the annual reference book Jane's Fighting Ships advocating its concept, proposing an ideal future British battleship of 17,000 long tons with a main battery of a dozen 12-inch guns in 8 turrets, 12 inches of belt armor, and a speed of 24 knots. The Royal Navy, the Imperial Japanese Navy, and the United States Navy all recognized these issues before 1905 and all came up with their designs to try and deal with this. The Royal Navy modified the design of the Lord Nelson class battleship to include a secondary armament of 9.2-inch guns that could fight at longer ranges than the 6-inch ones on the older ships, but a proposal to arm them solely with 12-inch guns was rejected, ending any chance of a pre-Dreadnought design being upgraded to Dreadnought-level armament parity, but setting the stage for the HMS Dreadnought. So the fact is, when it came to the ships, the Dreadnought class, they were pretty much designed because of the fact that, you know, all of the weaponry advancements, well, just went forward. So therefore they had bigger guns, they had a way to be able to carry them, so therefore they needed a new ship for them. I mean, it makes complete sense for me, and a lot of these general things. If we look at the HMS Dreadnought and some of its characteristics, it on a normal load was 18,000 long tons. It also had 23,000 SHP with 18 boilers running everything, which is pretty crazy. It also had a crew varying from 700 to 800, depending on which, which vehicle you are looking at. And then it had a decent amount of armor as well. So the belt was around 102 to 279 millimeters. The deck was at 19 to 76 millimeters. The barbettes 102 to 279. The turrets 76 to 305. So it does have a lot of armor on top of it. And also the armament itself. So what does it have? Well, it has 5 sets of it has 10, BL-12 inch L45 Mark 10 guns. These are set in, yes, it has 10 of these, and they're set in twin mounts. So it has 5 turrets with twin mounting BL-12 inch guns, which is pretty big. Then it has also 27 12-pounder guns, which are single-mounted guns, and then also has 5 18-inch submerged torpedo tubes alongside it. So you can see that this thing has a ridiculous amount of guns, 10 12 inches and 27 12-pounders. This thing could definitely dish out the damage if it wanted to. The next vehicle to have a look at is from Asians, and it's the JDS Hakuzuki. And the Hakuzuki class destroyers have obviously, we've talked about them before, but in a slightly different context. We obviously have an Hakuzuki in the game, but that's World War II Hakuzuki. This is a more modern day Hakuzuki. And this came about in the 50s because there was an interesting offer that the US had. So pretty much what the way it worked is because of the way that the Japanese were at that time, with the whole Defense Force thing, with the whole, fact that basically America was controlling the situation because of the Second World War. This was the first Japanese defense ship that was built by US budget. And the reason for this is because America actually offered an offshore procurement program, which basically meant that they would give you the money, and if you build the thing to their specifications, then this would be perfect. So in 1957, the US told Japan to do this, the offshore procurement program. And the program was to build a warship that was designed by the United States Navy and would use the US budget, so therefore it would be no cost to Japan. But Japan had already started to design and build destroyers itself. So the design of the Hakuzuki class is seen as, Japanese. They had, pretty good budgets, so therefore this machine could be over 2,000 tons. They also had some interesting quirks to it, such as the best new anti-sub mortar on it, and the design is actually similar to the Murasame class, with a few slight differences. This ship was used as quite a lot of flagships, mainly because it had some pretty good HQ equipment in it. It was used as the flagship of the self-defense fleet for 2 years. It was used as the flagship of Fleet Escort Force for 23 years, and also flagship of the training squadron during offshore training voyages 5 times. So yeah, it was used a lot during the 50s and the 60s, and then it was eventually retired in 1993 as a machine. Now, the armaments differ for 2 separate reasons. This thing had a refit in the 70s. So in 1960, this thing had 3 Mark 39 caliber 5-inch dual-purpose guns. It also had 2 Type 68 50 caliber 3-inch twin quick-firing guns, one Mark 108 anti-submarine mortar launcher, a bunch of depth charge stuff, and also it had a quadruple torpedo tube alongside with two Mark II torpedo launchers. And so it had some pretty cool stuff. It also had a bunch of radars and sonars on it. And then in the 1978 version of it, when it had the refit, it had three 5-inch dual-purpose guns, two 3-inch quick-firing guns, one Bofors rocket launcher, the Type 71. It also had one quadruple torpedo tube set up with it as well, with 8 of the experimental Type 54 torpedoes. So it did have a reload on those torpedoes, and it also had the triple torpedo launcher. Then it had the radars as well, and some extra sonar pieces. So this would be another incredibly modern, I suppose, destroyer, but it would be fun to see, at least for me. Nice to see the, parts of the Japanese Navy increased in the game. Then we have MC-205V, and it's time to talk about another Italian machine. This is a frigate, and of course, because for some reason countries keep using the same names for everything, this is the Centauro Class, or the Centauro Class frigates, the Centauro. So this is the flagship of the class. The Centauro Class consists of 4 units: the Canopo, the Centauro, the Signo, and the Castore. It was a type of frigate of the Navy which was built in Italy in the early 1950s. The construction of these units took place as part of the 1950s modernization program, and the construction of the class leader unit began in the 17th of May 1952, set up in the Ansaldo shipyards of Livorno. The engine system consisted of 2 groups of Ansaldo steam turbines powered by 2 Foster Wheeler boilers, whose operating temperatures was around 410 degrees Celsius and the pressure of 43 bar. Each group had a high-pressure turbine for the pace cruise and a low-pressure turbine for reverse. The total power developed by the engines was 22,000 horsepower, which allowed a maximum speed of 26 knots. The 2 groups, independent of each other, each acted on the axis of a propeller by means of reduction gears, and were located in 2 separate and contiguous watertight compartments. The group further forward acted on the starboard propeller and the burners of the supply boiler, which vented into the forward smokestack. The left group, similar to the previous one, vented into the aft smokestack. The units in the class were equipped with highly sensitive radar and ultrasound equipment, the data of which were processed by the COC, by the shooting center, and upon entry into service, the electronic discovery equipment consisted of an American-built AN-SPS6C airborne discovery radar that had 250 kilometers of coverage, and the units also mounted a surface detection radar, the AN-SPQ-2A/B of national construction, whose range was about 60 kilometers. The main armament consisted of 4 76mm Otto Melara cannons in 2 overlapping twin-barreled towers. The firing frequency was about 60 rounds a minute. The Centauro Class towers were fully automatic and continuous loading, allowing thus a higher shooting cadence, and the anti-aircraft armament consisted of 4 Breda Bofors 40 70mm machine guns or cannons in 2 twin systems located on the right and left of the central deckhouse aft of the second smokestack. The anti-submarine armament consisted of 1 305mm long Menon-type anti-submarine bomb launcher and 4 short Menon launchers, arranged 2 of each side on the deck in the center of the ship, 2 torpedo tubes were also there, 1 on each side, and a hopper for the release of 10 anti-submarine bombs. Upon entry into service, the Centauro Class was classified as a DE, or a Destroyer Escort, in 1957, and was classified as an anti-sub frigate. So there you go. There is the wonderful class, along with all of the other very interesting stuff. There is definitely a lot that Naval can be able to expand into, whether it's past with the Dreadnoughts or some of these more modern destroyers and escorts or frigates that we see in this. It's going to be a wonderful few years for Naval. Hopefully it can live up to the hype. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Trigger Hippie, Universe, Conte Baraka, Elove Goat, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hans, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.